When you look back at human history, it can seem like one long, chaotic story of revolt. It just feels constant, totally unpredictable, and honestly, a little overwhelming. But what if it's not just random chaos? What if, hidden beneath the noise of thousands of years of struggle, there are these universal patterns, almost like a source code for upheaval? Okay, let's really dig into this. I mean, it's a story that echoes through all of time, right? Let's start way back in ancient Rome. You've got enslaved gladiators like Spartacus rising up, fighting for their actual survival against the most powerful empire on the planet. Then we jump forward a bit to Han Dynasty China, and we see it again with the Yellow Turban Rebellion. This was a massive peasant uprising, and it was all driven by this powerful promise of divine justice and a more equal world. And we see it again in the Caribbean. I'm talking about the Haitian Revolution, where enslaved people pulled off the most successful slave revolt in all of history, completely overthrowing their colonial masters and building a new republic from scratch.
And this isn't just ancient history. We've seen it in our own time with the Arab Spring. A whole wave of uprisings challenged decades of authoritarian rule, all centered on this powerful demand for dignity and a real future.
So looking at all of these, it's easy to just see a relentless, chaotic cycle of violence. But is that all it is? Is it just chaos? Or are we actually watching the same story play out over and over again, just with different costumes and different settings? Is there some kind of underlying logic connecting it all? Well, it turns out there is. Across all these different cultures and centuries, revolts are consistently ignited by a powerful combination of three huge structural failures inside a ruling system. You can almost think of it as the universal source code for mass mobilization.
These three drivers are economic exploitation, ideological alienation, and political illegitimacy. Together, they form what we can call the trinity of failures. And when you get all three of them happening at the same time, well, the foundations of a society get incredibly shaky. So let's break each one down.
First up, you've got to have the economic fuel. This is the raw material, the hardship, the real energy that feeds the fire of revolt. It's what happens when wealth and resources get so concentrated at the very top that the people at the bottom are just pushed to their absolute breaking point. It's that feeling that the system is literally taking everything from you.
And the details always change, but the pressure is always a constant. It's the chattel slavery that fueled Spartacus's war. It's the crazy poll taxes that drove English peasants to march on London. It's the crippling land policies in the Indian Rebellion of 1857, or the systemic in-your-face corruption that paved the way for the Cuban Revolution. The specifics are different, but that crushing economic pressure, it's always there.
Okay. But that economic fuel needs a spark. And that spark? That's this powerful us versus them mentality. This is what gives a revolt its identity, its soul. It's that feeling that the people in charge aren't just taking your stuff. They don't get you, they don't respect you, and they definitely don't represent you. They are not us. And just look at the examples. The Greek-speaking Ptolemies ruling over native Egyptians, that created a huge cultural divide. The demand for religious reform, that's what united the Hussites in Bohemia against the powers that be. Think about the anti-foreign anger of the Boxer Rebellion, or that simple but incredibly profound call for dignity, or karama, during the Arab Spring. This alienation is what gives people the moral justification to act. The last piece of this trinity is state failure, and this is often the final trigger, the thing that just breaks the camel's back. It's when the government itself is seen as totally broken, it's failing to protect its people, it's hopelessly corrupt, or maybe it's just seen as a foreign power. At this point, the state just loses its moral right to rule. We see this with the decay of the Han Dynasty right before the Yellow Turbans exploded onto the scene, and the French nobility's failure to protect its own peasants, which led to the Jacquerie. So here's the key. When people believe their suffering is not only severe, but that the government has absolutely no right to inflict it, the stage is set for a full-blown revolt. So we've got the why. That trinity of failures gives people the push. But what were they all being pulled towards? I mean, it's easy to just throw the word freedom around, but that one word has meant radically different things throughout history. And this timeline just shows how much that definition of liberty has grown. In the ancient world, for someone like Spartacus, freedom was simple, survival, just an end to physical bondage. But by the medieval era, for groups like the Hussites, it included spiritual freedom and community rights. Then the Enlightenment comes along and introduces this huge idea of political, universal rights, freedom from an oppressive state. And in the modern era, it expands even more to national self-determination and what's called positive liberty, the freedom to flourish, with access to education and resources. The goal itself just keeps evolving. Okay, so we know why revolts happen and what they're fighting for. But what about how they end? This is where we find a really fascinating twist, a kind of paradox, where winning the battle doesn't always mean you've won the war. And sometimes losing is the best thing that can possibly happen. Let's just compare these two examples for a second. On one hand, you've got the Russian Revolution of 1917, total military victory. The Bolsheviks took power, but they ultimately just swapped the Tsar's autocracy for their own. Now look at the Irish Rebellion of 1798. It was a complete and utter military disaster. But its leaders became martyrs, its ideals became the stuff of legend, and it inspired generations of nationalists who eventually did win independence, over 100 years later. So here's the crucial point. A military victory can bring immediate change, for sure, but it often just ends up swapping one ruler for another. An ideological legacy, though, one that's born from even a crushing defeat, can plant seeds that grow into a forest of change generations down the line. The ideas end up being more powerful than any army. Okay, so we've seen the why in the Trinity of Failures, the what for in the evolution of freedom, and this strange paradox of success. Now, let's put it all together and reveal the final overarching pattern that connects everything we've talked about. And the concept is called fractal history. It suggests that history isn't just a straight line from A to B. Instead, it's more like a web of repeating patterns or motifs that echo across totally different scales. The same fundamental dynamics that drive a small peasant uprising can actually be seen in a massive global revolution. You know, history doesn't repeat itself, but like the saying goes, it sure does rhyme. And these rhymes are the motifs we've been exploring this whole time. The Trinity of Failures is the ignition sequence. The evolving definition of freedom is the goal they're aiming for. And the paradox of success is how a revolt's legacy echoes through time. You can even layer in other repeating patterns, like how you always need some unhappy elites to act as a catalyst, or how a powerful ideology can be a massive force multiplier. Together, they form these beautiful, self-similar patterns of this incredible historical fractal. So here's the thing. Once you start to see history this way, not as a boring list of dates, but as a fractal of repeating patterns, it gives you this powerful new lens to understand the world. It invites us to look at today's conflicts and protests not as these isolated, chaotic events, but as new versions of a very, very old human story. So the question then becomes, what historical rhymes do you see repeating right now?